Jerk walked through the dusty streets of Krylos with his head low, letting the wind carry away the whispers that always followed him. The settlement wasn't large, but it was crowded enough with alien merchants, soldiers, and scavengers that there was no escaping their eyes. Wherever he went, the stares came first, and then the words, weakling, scarred human, nothing but a shadow. He had heard it all before, countless times, yet the sting never dulled. The scars on his arms and chest were jagged lines that told a story no one wanted to understand. Each mark was a memory of survival, a proof that he had faced dangers others wouldn't even consider. Yet in Krylos, humans were rare, and rare meant fragile. The aliens here had strength far beyond human limits, bodies built for power, reflexes sharpened by evolution. They didn't see the battles Jerk had fought before arriving on Krylos, nor did they care. All they saw were the marks, and to them, marks meant weakness. Jerk's boots kicked up the reddish dust as he made his way to the training grounds on the edge of the settlement. The other mercenaries were already there, practicing combat drills with fluid precision. Their weapons were sleek, high-tech, and deadly. Jerk's gear, by contrast, was patched together from scraps, worn but functional. He adjusted the straps over his shoulders and joined the exercises, moving with a precision that belied his appearance. He was slower than some of them, yes, but he was far from powerless. Every motion was calculated, every strike measured. "Careful, human," sneered a tall reptilian warrior named Crawl. "Wouldn't want your scars to tear open again." The others laughed, some openly, some under their breath. Jerk ignored them, letting the rhythm of his movements drown out the mockery. He had learned long ago that responding to taunts only wasted energy, and energy was something he needed. He went through the drills, punching and kicking, ducking and weaving, until sweat ran down his face and stung his eyes. Then he began his personal training, moves the others would never understand. He balanced on one leg atop a narrow beam, held heavy weights above his head, and practiced strikes against invisible enemies. Every scar burned with memory, but instead of slowing him, they pushed him further. He remembered the battles that had given him these marks, the skirmishes with raiders on distant planets, the fights where he had been the last survivor, the moments when fear had threatened to paralyze him, but he had kept moving. By the time he finished, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the settlement. The other mercenaries were done too, some boasting to each other about their skills, others laughing at Jerk quietly as they left the training grounds. He stayed a while longer, practicing silently, letting the dusk cool the sweat on his body. Suddenly the alarm sounded, a deep, resonant siren that shook the settlement. People ran in every direction, screams cutting through the air. Jerk's heart didn't race, not from fear, but from recognition. He had heard this sound before on other worlds under worse circumstances. It meant one thing, an attack. He sprinted toward the source, eyes scanning for the enemy. A group of cybernetic raiders had landed at the edge of Krylos. Their armor gleamed in the dying light, and their weapons glinted with lethal precision. The aliens in the settlement panicked, running for cover or standing frozen, unsure of what to do. "Move aside!" Jerk shouted to a pair of alien guards blocking the path. They turned, surprised, and let him pass. He had no time for arguments. With a deep breath, he assessed the situation. The raiders were skilled, well-coordinated, and heavily armed. Most of the alien mercenaries here would not stand a chance in a direct fight. He couldn't fight them all, but he could create chaos. That was what humans were good at, using intelligence, improvisation, and unpredictability to survive. Jerk grabbed a discarded crate and rolled it toward the first raider, tripping him just enough to throw off his aim. He ducked under the sweeping arm of another raider, using a metal pipe to knock him to the ground. Every movement was calculated. Every strike counted. Civilians screamed, ducked, and fled, but Jerk moved through the chaos with a strange calm, focusing on what had to be done. He led a group of frightened settlers toward the supply depot, making sure they stayed out of the raiders' line of fire. A young alien child clutched his leg, crying, and he crouched, holding the child gently while scanning for danger. "Stay close," he said, voice steady. "I'll get you out." The child nodded, too scared to speak, but trusting him anyway. The raiders advanced, but Jerk was ready. Using debris, overturned carts, and the narrow alleys of Krylos, he set up traps that slowed them down. A falling crate here, a tripwire there, each one designed to give him and the settlers an advantage. By the time the alien mercenaries realized what he was doing, he had already led half the civilians to safety. Still, the raiders pressed on. One of them, a hulking figure with glowing eyes, charged at Jerk. He met the charge head-on, using the raiders' momentum against him. With a swift motion, he pivoted and slammed the raider into a wall. The creature roared, momentarily stunned, giving Jerk just enough time to move to the next threat. By the time the skirmish ended, the settlement was battered but intact. Some alien mercenaries were injured and the raiders had retreated, surprised by the unexpected resistance. People looked around, panting, wounded but alive. Jerk stood in the middle of the chaos, covered in dust and sweat, his scars fresh with minor cuts from the fight. And yet instead of applause or respect, he heard the whispers again. "Lucky human. Just a fluke. Couldn't do it without help." He clenched his fists, but he didn't argue. He had learned long ago that recognition from those who mocked him meant nothing. What mattered was survival, and today he had ensured that. That night, Jerk sat alone by a small fire on the outskirts of the settlement. The stars shone bright in the Krylos sky, cold and distant, but beautiful in their own way. He touched his scars gently, feeling the pain that reminded him of what he had survived. Each line, each mark was a lesson. Each scar told a story the others would never understand. As he stared into the flames, he thought about the future. The raiders had been only a small force. If they returned with more, the settlement would not survive without a plan. He couldn't rely on the alien mercenaries here. They were strong, yes, but they lacked the vision, the willingness to fight beyond what they were trained for. Humans, he realized, had one advantage they didn't: adaptability. Jerk had survived because he could think, improvise, and endure. That was his true strength. Over the next few days, Jerk began preparing. He didn't announce it, didn't brag, didn't call anyone to follow him. He trained harder, studied the terrain, and devised traps and strategies that even the alien mercenaries would later admire. Every scar, every injury he had endured became a lesson applied to his plan. He watched the settlement's defenses, noting weaknesses, studying the raiders' tactics based on their previous attack. The aliens who had mocked him continued to do so, unaware that the human they belittled was already thinking 10 steps ahead. They laughed at the way he moved, the way he trained alone, the way he carried his patched armor. But Jerk didn't need their approval. He needed results, and he would have them, no matter what anyone said. Then came the first real test. A scouting party of raiders returned, looking for easy targets. Jerk didn't wait for anyone else to act. Using the traps he had set, he ambushed them, picking off stragglers, causing confusion and forcing them to retreat. The aliens watched, stunned, as the human moved like a ghost through the alleys, striking with precision and disappearing before anyone could counter. Afterward, some of the mercenaries approached him, hesitant, unsure if they should congratulate or scold him for acting alone. Jerk only shook his head. "I did what had to be done," he said simply. "The settlement survives because we adapt. We survive because we plan." His words carried a weight they couldn't ignore, though they were too proud to admit it. Over time, the whispers about Jerk began to change. From mockery to cautious curiosity, from derision to uneasy respect. No one cheered him, no one called him a hero yet, but the stories of his actions spread quietly through Krylos. The same scars that had marked him as weak were now marks of experience, reminders that he had faced death and walked away. Jerk didn't celebrate. He knew that survival was only the beginning. The universe was larger, more dangerous than Krylos, and humans were still considered fragile. But he also knew something the aliens would never understand fully. The human spirit, when pushed to its limits, was unpredictable, relentless, and impossible to control. And so, with his scars still fresh, his body sore but unbroken, Jerk continued to train, continued to prepare, and continued to survive. Every day he learned, every day he adapted. And every day, the legend of the scarred human began quietly, one step at a time, in a galaxy that had mocked him for his weakness but would soon learn the meaning of strength. The sun rose over Krylos, burning the red dust of the settlement and casting long shadows across the streets. Jerk stood atop a rocky outcrop at the edge of town, scanning the horizon. Months had passed since the first attack, and yet the threat had not vanished. If anything, it had grown. Reports came from nearby settlements that a new enemy force, led by a warlord named Zitrax, was moving through the frontier systems, leaving ruin in its wake. Unlike the previous raiders, this force was organized, well-equipped, and ruthless. The aliens who had once mocked Jerk's scars now watched him with a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect. They still hesitated to trust him fully, but they had begun to recognize something they could not deny. The human's intelligence and unpredictability made him a dangerous ally or a dangerous enemy. Jerk did not seek their approval, but he understood the importance of their cooperation if the settlement was to survive. He returned to the training grounds, not for drills this time, but to prepare for war. Every movement he made was deliberate. He tested traps, refined combat strategies, and experimented with weapons crafted from scrap and alien tech. Humans were weaker physically, but they had an advantage. They could think in ways others did not. Jerk exploited that advantage to its fullest. A meeting was called among the mercenary leaders. The room was filled with tension, the air thick with the scent of sweat, metal, and anticipation. Jerk entered quietly, scars exposed, standing taller than ever despite the whispers that had followed him for so long. Zitrax's approaching fleet was a threat unlike any Krylos had seen before, and the aliens were desperate for guidance. One of the older mercenaries, a broad-shouldered being with 6 eyes, spoke first. "We cannot match Zitrax in open battle. Their numbers are too great and their ships too powerful. If we meet them head-on, Krylos will fall. We fight where they do not expect, strike when they are unprepared, and turn their strength against them." His voice was steady, commanding, carrying the weight of experience that no alien could match. Doubt filled the room, but Jerk did not flinch. He outlined his plan: ambushes along supply routes, traps in narrow canyons, and small strike teams that could create confusion among Zitrax's forces. He spoke of using Krylos itself as a weapon, leveraging the terrain, the dust storms, and the settlement's network of tunnels and alleys. Each suggestion was meticulous, each strategy designed to maximize the human advantage: cunning, adaptability, and endurance. Over the next few days, Jerk led the preparation. The aliens, reluctantly at first, began to follow his instructions. They cleared areas for traps, set up decoys, and reinforced key positions. Jerk moved among them, demonstrating techniques, correcting mistakes, and teaching the small humans and aliens alike how to fight smarter, not just stronger. His scars, once marks of ridicule, now became symbols of authority. Every line and mark on his body told the story of survival and experience, and those who had mocked him could no longer ignore it. The first encounter came quickly. Zitrax's scouts arrived in the dead of night, confident and careless. Jerk had anticipated their approach. Using shadows and narrow paths, he led a small team to intercept them. The ambush was precise, explosives hidden under debris, tripwires, and smoke to obscure vision. The raiders stumbled into traps, their formation broken before they realized what had happened. Jerk fought in the midst of chaos, moving with fluid precision, striking with calculated force, and using every scar on his body as a memory of previous battles. He turned the enemy's momentum against them, throwing them into walls, tripping them over hidden obstacles, and creating openings for his team to attack. By the time the fight ended, the raiders were disoriented and several had fled back toward their fleet. The aliens who witnessed the ambush stared in astonishment. The human had done what they thought impossible, yet even in victory, Jerk remained focused. "We must expect more," he said. "This is only the beginning. Zitrax will not tolerate failure. Watch him closely." Zitrax had arrived with a fleet, intending to crush Krylos once and for all. The settlement was fortified, traps laid, and small strike teams positioned to harass and delay. The alien mercenaries, though strong, relied on Jerk's plans, and the humans followed his lead without hesitation. The first wave of attackers descended, confident and brutal. Their ships opened fire and troops poured onto the surface. Krylos shook under the barrage. Jerk moved among his people, directing movements, adjusting traps, and striking where he was needed most. The battle was intense, chaos everywhere, yet his mind remained clear. Each decision was calculated, each strike purposeful. He faced Zitrax's elite guards in the heart of the chaos. They mocked him as before, calling him weak, scarred, unworthy. Yet Jerk used their overconfidence against them. He lured them into narrow alleys where their size and strength became disadvantages. He fought with a combination of agility, strategy, and sheer willpower, turning the enemy's attacks into their downfall. Every scar ached, every injury reminded him of the stakes, but he pressed on. The aliens around him began to fight differently, inspired by Jerk's actions. They moved with more coordination, using strategy instead of relying solely on brute force. Civilians took shelter, and the raiders found themselves trapped in a web of ambushes and misdirection. Hours passed, but the tide began to turn. Zitrax's forces, though larger and more technologically advanced, were unprepared for the unpredictable tactics employed by the humans and their allies. Jerk continued to strike at key positions, targeting supply lines, communications, and high-ranking officers. His scars, once mocked, now marked him as a figure of authority and fear. By evening, the settlement had survived the day. Zitrax's forces retreated, unable to maintain cohesion under the relentless, unpredictable attacks. Jerk stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, watching as smoke rose from destroyed vehicles and fallen machines. The aliens who had once laughed at him now approached, hesitant but respectful. They did not call him a hero, not yet, but the change in their eyes was unmistakable. That night Jerk sat by a fire again, the stars above Krylos shining cold and distant. His body ached from the battle, his scars burning with memory, but his mind was alive with possibilities. He had faced an enemy far stronger than anyone here imagined, and he had survived. More than survived, he had won. He knew this was only the beginning. Zitrax would return, stronger, more determined. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and indifferent to the survival of one settlement. But Jerk had learned a lesson that no alien could understand fully. Human resilience was not measured in strength or speed, but in ingenuity, endurance, and the will to fight against impossible odds. The next day, Jerk moved through the settlement, inspecting defenses and speaking with his small team. He shared lessons from the previous battle, refining strategies and preparing for the next encounter. The humans and sympathetic aliens who followed him began to trust his guidance fully. They no longer doubted his abilities. His scars, once symbols of ridicule, had become banners of experience and wisdom. News of the battle spread to neighboring settlements. Zitrax's advance was slowed, his forces frustrated by an unexpected resistance. The human warrior with the scars became a name whispered among the stars, a symbol of cleverness, courage, and unpredictability. Jerk did not seek this reputation, but he recognized its value. Fear and respect were powerful tools when wielded wisely. Weeks later, Jerk led another skirmish, this time beyond the settlement, targeting Zitrax's supply convoys. His team moved swiftly, striking without warning, disappearing before the enemy could react. The tactics were unconventional but effective. Every strike further cemented the legend of the scarred human who refused to yield. Jerk's scars, which had once drawn ridicule, now carried meaning. They told a story of survival, strategy, and endurance. They reminded him of every mistake, every victory, every moment when the odds were against him, and he had persevered. The aliens around him began to understand that the scars were not a weakness. They were a testament to the human ability to endure and adapt. By the end of this period, Krylos had become a fortress, and Jerk its unlikely commander. The aliens who had once mocked him now followed his lead without hesitation. The settlement was no longer just a collection of frightened beings. It was a community prepared to fight, to endure, and to survive under the guidance of the scarred human warrior. Jerk stood atop a ridge one evening, looking at the horizon. Zitrax would return, stronger, more dangerous, but Jerk felt ready. The scars on his body ached, his muscles were sore, yet his mind was sharper than ever. He had turned ridicule into respect, weakness into strength, and unpredictability into power. The human warrior had risen, not through sheer physical strength, but through intelligence, endurance, and the refusal to be broken. As the stars blinked in the Krylos sky, Jerk felt something he had not allowed himself to feel before: hope. Not just for himself, but for the settlement, for the humans, and for those willing to follow him. He knew the coming battles would be difficult, and the enemy would be formidable. But he also knew that the human spirit, once pushed beyond its limits, was a force that no alien could fully comprehend or defeat. The story of Jerk, the scarred human warrior, continued to grow quietly among the stars. He had survived ridicule, danger, and impossible odds. He had learned that scars were not shame, they were strength. And as he prepared for the next phase of the war, he understood that his legend was only beginning. The galaxy would soon remember the name of the human who turned mockery into power, weakness into strategy, and survival into legend. The horizon burned red as Zitrax's fleet appeared above Krylos, larger and more menacing than anyone had imagined. Ships of every shape and size hovered like predatory birds, their shadows stretching across the settlement. The aliens who had once mocked Jerk's scars now stood at his side, silent and tense, ready for what was coming. The humans, though smaller in number, moved with precision, their training under Jerk's guidance making them far more capable than anyone expected. Jerk walked among his people, inspecting weapons, checking defenses, and offering encouragement. His scars were visible under the armor he wore, each one a silent reminder of every battle he had survived. They had once been marks of weakness in the eyes of the aliens, but now they were symbols of leadership and experience. Every step he took radiated calm, confidence, and determination. Zitrax's arrival was no surprise to Jerk. He had anticipated it. The humans and aliens under his command moved like a single organism, setting traps, positioning snipers, and preparing the terrain to favor their strengths. The narrow canyons, tunnels, and rocky ridges of Krylos would be their allies. Zitrax may have had numbers, technology, and brute force, but Jerk had ingenuity, strategy, and the unpredictable nature of human willpower. The first wave of Zitrax's troops descended swiftly. Ships opened fire, and mechanical drones began landing to secure the ground. The settlement shook under the barrage, dust, and debris filling the air. Jerk stayed calm, signaling his teams with hand gestures, short commands, and subtle movements. Every trap was sprung at the right moment. Explosions rocked the landing zones, tripwires tumbled armored units, and hidden barricades funneled the attackers into choke points. Amid the chaos, Jerk faced Zitrax's elite warriors, massive, heavily armed beings who had laughed at him in intelligence reports. They mocked him openly, calling him weak and insignificant. Jerk did not flinch. He moved like a shadow through smoke and fire, striking with precision, ducking attacks, and using the environment to his advantage. One by one, he dismantled the enemy's confidence, turning overconfidence into their weakness. His scars ached from the fight, every line burning as if reminding him of past victories and failures alike, but he pressed on without hesitation. The aliens who followed him were inspired. Where before they had relied on brute strength, they now fought with strategy, exploiting openings Jerk created. Civilians huddled safely in reinforced shelters, while the enemy began to falter under a constant stream of unexpected tactics. Jerk's team used decoys, smoke screens, and improvised explosives to throw Zitrax's forces into confusion. The battlefield became a labyrinth, one that only Jerk and his followers navigated with ease. Hours passed and the settlement held. Zitrax's forces were strong, but the resistance was smarter, faster, and more coordinated than they anticipated. Jerk moved from point to point, never staying still, always assessing, always planning the next move. His scars were a roadmap of survival, guiding him through pain, fatigue, and chaos. Each strike he made was informed by the lessons etched into his body, each decision strengthened by experience no alien could match. Then came the moment that would define the battle. Zitrax himself descended in the midst of the chaos, a towering figure in advanced armor, flanked by his most loyal warriors. The ground trembled under his presence and fear rippled through some of the alien mercenaries, but not Jerk. He stepped forward, unflinching, his eyes fixed on the warlord. Zitrax laughed, his voice booming over the battlefield. "You are nothing, human, just a scarred weakling in a galaxy of strength. Stand aside and I might spare your settlement." He let the silence answer. Every inch of his body was ready, every scar alive with memory and resolve. He knew brute force would not win this fight. He had learned that intelligence, agility, and strategy could turn the impossible into possible. He advanced cautiously, drawing Zitrax and his warriors into the narrow canyon Jerk had chosen. Here, the larger forces would be constrained and human ingenuity would dominate. The first clash was violent. Zitrax's warriors struck with power, attempting to crush the human and his allies. Jerk ducked, rolled, and countered, using their momentum against them. A swing of an arm was redirected, a charge turned into a stumble, a blow deflected into a trap. The aliens who had doubted him before watched in awe as he moved with skill that seemed almost unnatural. Every scar seemed to pulse with energy, every mark a lesson applied in real time. Jerk's team attacked in tandem, exploiting weaknesses in Zitrax's formation. Humans and aliens worked as one, guided by his tactics, striking, retreating, and striking again. Zitrax grew frustrated, his confidence shaken. Every misstep Jerk anticipated, every trap sprung with perfect timing, and every strike landed with precision chipped away at the warlord's advantage. The battle reached its climax when Jerk and Zitrax faced each other directly. The canyon around them shook with explosions, fire, and debris. Zitrax struck with brute force, each blow powerful enough to crush lesser beings. Jerk dodged and weaved, using agility, intelligence, and endurance. His scars throbbed with pain, but they reminded him of every fight that had brought him here. He was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting to prove that weakness could be strength and that intelligence could topple might. With a combination of feints, strategic maneuvers, and sheer human unpredictability, Jerk found an opening. He struck with precise timing, exploiting a flaw in Zitrax's armor. The warlord staggered, giving Jerk the chance to disarm and unbalance him. Using Zitrax's own momentum against him, Jerk sent the warlord crashing into a rock formation, finally bringing him to the ground. The elite warriors surrounding Zitrax hesitated, their confidence shaken by the fall of their leader. Jerk did not gloat. He stood over Zitrax, his body battered but unbroken, his scars alive with every memory of struggle and survival. The warlord, beaten and humiliated, realized the truth. This human, once mocked, was more formidable than any alien could comprehend. The battlefield fell silent as the retreating forces fled, unwilling to challenge the human who had turned their expectations upside down. The aftermath was a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and awe. The settlement had survived, against impossible odds, because of a human who refused to yield. The aliens who had once laughed at him now approached with reverence. They did not call him a hero outright, but their eyes spoke volumes. Jerk's scars, once derided, were now symbols of resilience, strategy, and unmatched willpower. That night, Jerk sat by a fire outside the settlement, stars stretching across the Krylos sky. His body was sore, his scars burned with pain, and yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced the strongest enemy the settlement had ever seen, and he had prevailed. The humans and aliens under his guidance were safe, at least for now. The lesson was clear. Survival depended on intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to fight beyond expectations. News of Jerk's victory spread quickly. Other settlements whispered of the scarred human who had faced Zitrax and won, turning ridicule into power and weakness into strategy. The legend grew not from boasting, but from deeds witnessed by all who survived the battle. Humans, once seen as fragile and weak, were now respected for their ingenuity and resilience. Jerk did not seek fame. He cared little for titles or recognition. What mattered was preparation, survival, and teaching others to do the same. Yet, even as he trained and strategized for the battles yet to come, he knew the galaxy had begun to see humans differently. His scars, etched by pain and survival, had become a beacon of strength. In the weeks that followed, Krylos became a symbol of defiance. Other humans and aliens began to arrive, inspired by the tales of the scarred warrior who had turned mockery into victory. Jerk led them, teaching them tactics, survival, and the value of intelligence over brute force. He became not just a fighter, but a mentor, a strategist, and a living testament to the human spirit. Zitrax's defeat was more than a battle one. It was a lesson to the galaxy. Strength was not measured solely by size, technology, or raw power. Endurance, strategy, and the ability to adapt could turn the tide even in the darkest hour. Jerk's scars, once a mark of ridicule, were now a story of survival and triumph. They told every observer, every soldier, and every alien that humans were not to be underestimated. As the stars shone over Krylos, Jerk looked to the horizon, knowing that more challenges awaited. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and unknowns, and human survival was never guaranteed. But he had proven something vital. Humans could endure, adapt, and overcome against impossible odds. The scars he bore were a map of every trial survived, every enemy faced, and every victory earned. And so Jerk walked through Krylos, not as a mocked outcast, not as a fragile human, but as a warrior who had turned ridicule into legend. The aliens who had once doubted him now followed, inspired by his courage and ingenuity. The humans under his guidance looked to him as a symbol of what they could achieve. Across the galaxy, the name of the scarred human warrior began to travel. Tales of his cleverness, bravery, and unyielding spirit spread from settlement to settlement. He had survived scorn, danger, and overwhelming odds. He had turned weakness into power, fear into inspiration, and mockery into respect. Jerk had not just survived. He had walked into legend, carrying with him the story of what it truly meant to be human. As Krylos settled into a quiet night, the settlement's fires flickering under the stars, Jerk sat alone once more. His scars were still visible, still burning with memory, but they no longer felt like marks of shame. They were proof of everything he had endured and overcome. He had survived when others would have fallen, outsmarted enemies stronger than himself, and led those who doubted him to victory. For the first time, Jerk allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy had mocked humans, dismissed them, and underestimated them. But through intelligence, endurance, and unbreakable will, he had proven the truth. A human could endure, could lead, and could walk into legend. The story of Jerk, the scarred human warrior, was no longer a tale of mockery. It had become a legend of the stars, a symbol of human ingenuity, courage, and resilience. And though the galaxy was vast and challenges would come again, Jerk knew one thing. As long as humans had will, cunning, and heart, no enemy, no force, no mockery could ever break them.